What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Nvidia stock, ticker symbol NVDA, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Friday, May 24th. All right, guys, Nvidia stock here today, finishing the day up $88.49 a share. That's plus 9.32% in regular trading hours. It's down a couple of dollars here in the after hours. After a day like that, especially take it with a grain of salt. After hours is very, very low volume today. So again, take that with a grain of salt. Of course, a lot of the movement left over from last night's after hours move on earnings, which of course we discussed. Nvidia is a daily upload if you're new here. So I appreciate you subscribe to the channel if you are. Now listen, let's take a look at Nvidia and really try to get a feel for this name heading into the last trading day of this week here, Friday. We're going to look at the volume profile, try to pull out any directional bias that we may have witnessed today. We'll look at the psychological self-fulfilling prophecy levels, the implied volatility, the expected move for tomorrow, and the directional bias out of the chain for tomorrow. Now listen, guys, today was the first day after earnings on the stock. So naturally, today is one of the best days we have to look at data, because it's the first day that we get updated data, especially in the options chain, after the actual catalyst. Okay, because it's the first intraday session, of course, after the event. So let's get started here with the quick little volume profile analysis on the 5-minute chart. Of course, being a bullish day, it can be a little bit deceiving because a lot of the movement happened after hours. So the intraday session, we don't necessarily need to see massive bullish bias, because the majority of the move didn't necessarily happen in the intraday session. Okay, so it can be a little bit deceiving if you're comparing this volume profile, which I haven't looked at quite yet. We're going to look at it here together. And against, I should say, the percent gain. Okay, so just understand that. So we're looking for at least a bit of bullish bias, ideally with the bulls. Bears, you guys would ideally want to see at least no bias at all to support the bulls move here today. If you're a bear, that's what you would want. So let's take a look here. If we compare the volume, I mean, you can see, guys, that typically on Nvidia, we see 1 million, maybe 1.5 million, up to maybe 2 million shares on the opening 5-minute bar. Today, we had over 4.5 million. Sometimes, guys, I know you always hear me say a single outlying bar typically needs to be ignored because there's too much of a risk. But I'm also a huge believer in sample size and eyeballs, okay, and big numbers giving us an opinion. So when we get over 4.5 million shares on a single bar, that in and of itself, to me, signals a bit of bias. Is it 100% on a scale of 0 to 100? Probably not. But it is certainly there, undeniably so. We're seeing 4.5+ million shares on a single 5-minute bar, and it's a pretty decently sized green bar. Now, understand there are a few wicks on that bar. So it perhaps was a little bit of a battle bar, but the actual body of the candle did not end up being all that small. Okay, so clearly some bullish bias going on off the open. Then from there, we get a pretty contextual move, or I should say a pretty contextual profile into the middle of the day, or at least mid-morning. And then after the smoke cleared from the open, you know, we saw a couple of pops here on bullish volume, and then it fades off quickly. That's like a 5 to 10% bullish bias, I would say. Very small. And then as we move through the day, pretty contextual, honestly, for the rest of the day. This red bar here, that's a rebalancing bar. I tend to ignore those because it's just a lot of buying and selling going on by algorithms right after the closing bell. So all we're seeing here today, guys, is some beefy bullish bias. Not 100%, again, but pretty beefy based on purely on the volume of that bar. And then some very slight bullish bias not long after the open there. And that's what we're getting. So, bulls, not a bad day here in the profile. Bears, you know, what are you going to do? At least we're not seeing 100% bullish bias left and right. Now, let's move on to something arguably a bit more simple, but highly effective. And this is the day that I really want to look at all the psychological and self-fulfilling prophecy levels. We'll start here on the 30-minute. The white line is the 50 period. The gray line, the 200. Now, after last night's move, what do we talk about? Well, we talked about how expect that 50 period was going to come upside. It certainly did that. It got above $1,000 a share here today. It's doing so in the after hours, so I'm taking that with a bit of a grain of salt, but it's up above 1,000, which is great. Okay, why? Because the 50 period is just another psychological potential barrier back to the downside, a bit of a hang-up. And if you're a bull, you want as many hang-ups, getting some feet up underneath this move as we can possibly get. This was a big move. Okay, this rocketed us above $1,000 a share. We had discussed that. We'll take a look at the expected move. It's all playing out very similar to what we've been discussing all week. The market's, I guess, anticipation of volatility has been rather accurate, but it required us to do some educated guesswork, and it's all going very well thus far. But looking ahead to tomorrow, last trading day before the long weekend. Guys, if we see a retest of the 50 period, that is the kind of the one thing currently in between us and $1,000 a share, which is, by the way, the biggest level in Nvidia's history, arguably. If we see a retest here tomorrow, I want to see that 50 period bounce on high volume bears. Number one priority, rip through the 50 period, even if as it comes upside, rip through the 50 period on high volume, retest on low volume, reject on high volume, reclaim the 50 as resistance. That sets you bears up for a big test of 1,000. Now, moving on to the 4 hour here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because there's about 100 points or so in between the stock and the 50 period on the 4 hour chart right now. And really the moving averages are what are most specific to this chart. Anything else we can do better on the daily. But all I'm watching, bulls. This 50 period, if we can get that ascending as aggressively as possible, trying to get up by us as quickly as we can, that's really all I'm after here on the 4 hour. Okay, ideally claiming as many $10 increments as we possibly can. Let's move on. We can do better on the daily. Now, listen, guys, we're in uncharted waters. Over $1,000 a share. This was a big move. This is a big win, at least in the very short term for Nvidia. But it's day one, above a big level. And I think it would be irresponsible and a little bit silly, dare I say, to start assuming that 1,000 is just held by default. Because listen, the bears are dreaming tonight of a retest of 1,000. Because if you're a bear right now, your dream is to get this to be a 3-digit stock as soon as possible. And believe it or not, not everybody in the world is positioned long Nvidia. It seems like everyone is, but not quite everyone on the planet is long Nvidia right now. There's likely to be at least some bearish pressure being put on the stock. Now, whether or not the bulls outweigh that is yet to be seen. Okay, but listen, bulls, any retest of $1,000 a share, I want to see that hold more than anything. Okay, bears. What do we want more than anything in the world right now? A downside break below $1,000 a share, a retest, and a rejection. That sends a message to the bulls, wouldn't it? Right, you just reclaimed $1,000 a share as resistance. That would be a big deal. Bulls, hold 1,000. Maybe reclaim 1050. Hell, maybe start to move up toward $1,100. That remains to be seen. That requires another pretty big percentage move. But I would say right now, each $50 increment is a bit of a psychological level. Each $100 increment is a pretty big psychological level, with 1,000 being what everything is hinging on right now. Implied volatility. As discussed, been warning about this all week, it tanked off here today. So now, in relation to the last week, it's very low. In relation to the last month, it's very low. And in relation to the last 3 months, it's almost the lowest it's been. Okay, so the Vega value currently being priced into contracts is currently low in those time frames, I should say. So be aware of that, especially if you're trading options. Now, expected move. Thursdays are easy. And especially now that we have new data after the earnings event. The educated guesswork is done for now. Thursdays are great, especially a daily today. We have an expiration tomorrow. The expected move by Friday's close compared to today, Thursday's close, is plus or minus $22.72 per share. So the market expects, or I should say the one standard deviation expected volatility by tomorrow compared to today's close, is either Nvidia runs another nearly $23 from here, or falls not quite below 1,000. Okay, because we closed at nearly 1038, and the expected move is plus or minus 23 bucks approximately. So the market doesn't expect, at least within the one standard deviation volatility expectation, that the stock gives up 1,000 by tomorrow, even in the minus scenario of the plus or minus, because understand that the expected move does not bake in directional bias. It's the whole point is that it's a volatility expectation, which is, a necessity to be aware of as a baseline if you're trading options, because then if you disagree with that one way or the other, you think it's going to be less or more volatile, that coupled with your strong directional bias, that could be a position for you. It's not just directional bias. We also have to know what the volatility bias is and then position ourselves properly to try to capitalize on both being directionally correct and correct in the volatility assumption. But you might be thinking, what about directional bias? Well, if we take a look at the volume here, we had just under 3 million contracts traded on Nvidia here today. 1.68 million were calls and 1.27 million were puts. So we're seeing a call side bias on the overall call put ratio here today. Now, if we break that down by time frame, we go the 0 to 20 delta range. Those are going to be the short-term speculators, or at least the highest concentration of them. 536,000 calls, 771,000 puts. That bias, when you go from overall to short-term speculators, flips from bullish to slightly bearish. Okay? Which tells us also that as we go closer to at the money and then in the money and deep in the money, that ratio flips back, or I should say that bias flips back to bullish. And on average, if you take the expirations in each of those delta ranges, on average, that's like the midterm, longer term, and long-term outlook. Okay, those are leaning bullish here today, whereas the shortest term outlook, at least on average, right, is the only thing really leaning bearish here today. Guys, if you want to come trade with me every single day, I'm sending out my scalp setup alerts, my in-play stock alerts, human verified by me, unusual options activity, and working with my Platinum one-on-one members every single day. You can find that at that link in the pinned comment. And by the way, if you appreciate the daily NVIDIA videos, best thing you can do for the channel is leave a like on the video and then get out of here and enjoy your day. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.